Hi everybody, I'm Cece Bell, the author and illustrator of this book, Deafo. We're only on chapter 4, and I've officially lost my mind. I'm back. How's my hair? Does it look good? Probably not, but that's okay, because we're not here to talk about hair. We are here to talk about chapter 4 of Deafo. So this chapter has a lot to unpack, literally and figuratively, and because of that, I have made myself some notes for each page, and so you might see me looking down a little bit more today because I need to keep checking my notes. I don't want to forget anything. So we'll go ahead and jump in. Chapter 4 begins with, "Soon after I say goodbye to my friends at Fisher School, I say goodbye to Emma too." So in that picture you see that I'm holding Miss Bunn, who you remember from earlier, and Miss Bunn and I are waving to Emma, and we're also waving goodbye to her little stuffed animal, Snoopy. And Snoopy, of course, is based on Snoopy from Peanuts by Charles Schulz. And Peanuts is one of the most important comics ever. If you are interested in writing your own comics, then Peanuts is a very good place to start. That comic strip has everything. But before this turns into a long 30-minute segment about Peanuts, let me wrap up this little thing by saying that not only did Emma have that sweet little Snoopy that was her cherished best friend stuffed animal, she also had a real live chicken named Woodstock who laid eggs and everything. And here's a picture of me with the one and only Woodstock. So sweet. Such a great chicken. But anyway, so I'm saying goodbye to Emma, and I'm saying goodbye to that wonderful neighborhood in Richmond. And if you remember from my discussion of chapter 3, I did maintain my friendship with Emma, but that's not in the book. And it was still hard to know that I was moving away and that we wouldn't see each other every day like we had for several years. So we wave goodbye, and then we get into a light yellow Volkswagen Beetle, and we really did have a car like that. And then you see that we're driving toward a place called Warnock. So actually, if my father was driving, and I'm not sure who was driving, but just as a joke, sorry Dad, if my father was driving, then the route would have looked like this, because my dad doesn't always listen to people giving him directions. But what we should have done was gone west on Route 64 and south on Route 81, and we would have actually gone a little further south on 81 past Warnock to a little city called Salem, Virginia. And we ended up moving into a very big house, a very big, beautiful house that used to be a girls' school, believe it or not. So we went from this kind of medium-sized townhouse in Richmond to a much bigger house on Broad Street in Salem, Virginia. And just like West Avenue in Richmond had a whole lot of kids, Broad Street also had a lot of kids, a lot of neighborhood kids, and they were all super friendly, and they were known as the Broad Street Brats. And I became a Broad Street Brat also. I wear that badge proudly. But there were so many kids that we all had t-shirts that said Broad Street Brats on them. And on this page, on page 36, it's kind of, this scene is kind of made up because I needed a place to explain how difficult groups are for me, and not only that, how difficult it is when everybody is listening to something like the radio or a comedy record, and everybody's laughing and having fun, and I can hear the radio, but I can't understand that, and that's a very important distinction. So on panel 3, one of the kids tries to be nice and turns up the radio super loud for me, thinking, and just being nice, and thinking that if they turn it up, then I'll be able to hear it, and therefore I'll be able to understand it. Here's what I wish I could say. Thanks, but I can hear the radio with my hearing aid just fine. I just can't understand it because I can't see the faces of the people who are singing and talking. In other words, you can't lip read the radio because you can't see their faces. So therefore, I couldn't understand them. But what I actually said is, well, thanks, because I wasn't ready to discuss my hearing loss with anybody yet. I think I still thought of myself as a hearing person because for the first almost 5 years of my life, I could hear. And now I couldn't, and I didn't have the words to explain what was going on. I wasn't ready to talk about it, so I didn't. On page 37, I have a little bit of fun with the speech balloons and just with the sound in general. And you'll see in the top 3 panels in the speech balloons, the words are clear because the kids are singing along to the radio, and so I can see their mouths and figure out what they're saying. But then the words above them coming out of the radio are all garbled and strange because I can't see the faces of the singers. And in this case, the kids are singing a song from the 70s that was very popular, Don't Go Breaking My Heart by Elton John and Kiki Dee. And Kiki Dee had this wonderful haircut and these overalls that every girl wanted. That hairstyle was the thing. Kiki Dee had it, and Dorothy Hamill, who was a very famous ice skater, and I think she won the Olympics in 1976, I think, for figure skating. She had that hairstyle. I think it was called the Page Boy, and I had that hairstyle too. At one point, I had the Page Boy as well. It was a very popular hairstyle. But anyway, the song goes something like, don't go breaking my heart. I couldn't if I tried. I'm a terrible singer, but something like that. When I was down, you was my clown. Whatever. But Elton John, Kiki Dee. That's the song. And anyway, the page goes on, page 37 goes on to show all the kids laughing because the radio DJ says something funny. They're all laughing, and I don't know what they're laughing about. And instead of saying, what are you laughing about? I just sort of fake a laugh. Oh, ha, 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 ha. I am the master of the fake laugh. It's a way to get out of situations just like this, where you don't understand something and it feels too hard to explain that you can't hear, so you just fake it. That's not a very good thing to do, but I have a lot of experience doing it. So that kind of situation leads to great loneliness, as you'll see in the final panel of page 37. You feel left out. You don't understand. So on page 38, summer is almost over, and my mother is telling me that I'll be going to a new school, and not only that, I'll be going to a school that does not have any other deaf kids or any other kids with hearing aids there. So my previous school, J.B. Fisher Elementary, it did have that class where everybody else had a hearing aid like mine. In this case, I am getting mainstreamed, and I'm sure almost all of you, probably all of you, know what that word means. And it basically means that a kid like me with a disability is accepted into a class where no one else has a disability like that. Everybody else is, for lack of a better word, normal. Nobody likes that word, but you know what I'm talking about, hopefully. Anyway, so I'm just put into a class where the kids are normal, and that's okay. But what happens next is I find out that I'm not going to this new school with my regular hearing aid. I'm getting a brand new hearing aid, something called an auditory trainer or an FM system. And I'm pretty upset to find out that it's going to be quite large and much larger than the one that I was wearing at home at this time. But nevertheless, page 38 continues, and I'm headed to Academy Street School, which was a very, very old school that had been in Salem forever and ever, and a beautiful, beautiful old building. I loved that school. Giant windows. We ate lunch in the basement, and the basement was always nice and warm because all the heating pipes were on the ceiling, and it was just really nice. I remember sitting next to a girl named Janie, whose lunch consisted of saltine crackers with these little perfect squares of bologna that her mom had cut for her. Oh, it was beautiful. But I really did like the school. But anyway, I didn't feel that comfortable yet. I wasn't all nice and warm and cozy in the basement yet because I was wearing this new hearing aid, the phonic ear. And the phonic ear is something that I still have. It doesn't work anymore, and I'm going to show it to you in a second. But the phonic ear is an auditory trainer, and it's made by this company that is actually based in Denmark. And they, my editor, when we were working on this book, actually contacted the company to make sure it was okay for us to use the phonic ear in the book. And they were so nice, and they said yes. And so yay for that, because I love that name, the phonic ear. It sounds very powerful. But this is the real phonic ear from the book and from my childhood. Like I said, it doesn't work, but you can see that it really does have that sweet little R with the way it curls up. Oh, isn't that heartbreaking? The long cord with earpieces and straps, long straps with snaps on the end, and the snaps, very satisfying snap. And each side has its own on-off switch and its own volume, one for that side and one for this side, so that you could control the sound going up to your ears. So this is what I wore every day in school, and only for school. I did not wear this at home because this hearing aid is so powerful. It actually hurts your ears eventually. If you were to wear it all day, you would probably damage your ears. So it was only used at school where it was needed to help me get educated. And the teachers are always standing much farther away from me than my parents would stand at home. So I needed that amplification from the teacher's microphone, which is this little thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. I needed that at school because the teacher doesn't always stand right next to you. So you need that extra volume to help you hear her. But I'll put this on for you. So every day I would grab this and strap it around. Let's see. Each strap would go here here, and then, so that's that part. And then the earpieces would go into my ears like this. So that was basically the whole look, except I didn't walk around school with my elbows out. They're out because I'm just trying to keep them in place. And I've got my other hearing aids and my smaller ones, and so I can't really cram these earpieces in. But anyway, pretty much what it looks like. But as you'll see, and as you probably noticed, the sun came out, excuse me. The sun will come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there'll be sun. Anyway, Annie, what a great musical, right? Ah, Annie, so good. Nonetheless, where was I? I was thinking about tomorrow, wasn't I? A very apt song for these times. Yeah, so you'll see that right now the hearing aid is on the outside of my clothes. But you know from the book that that's not what I did in real life. In real life, I always kept it covered, so it actually looked more like, let's see if I can get this right. I've got a sweater. In real life, I always kept it covered. Okay. And you'll notice that it makes my sweater, or whatever I might be wearing at the time, it makes it pop out some. So I really look more like this in school. The cords came out of my sweater or whatever I was wearing to cover it, and then my front like that. So way back then when I was in first grade and wearing this for the first time, the other kids would ask me, "What's going on with you? What is that?" And as you know, I wasn't ready to talk about that yet. I hadn't quite reconciled myself to the fact that I was deaf. I have to use this. It was still really new to me and still not something I was comfortable talking about the way I was comfortable talking about it with my classmates in kindergarten, who were so much more like me. So instead of the easy answer, which is, "Oh, I'm deaf. This is a hearing aid. It helps me hear." That's not what I said. What I told my classmates in the first grade was that I was pregnant. Yes, I was going to have a baby. They didn't know what to think about that. They immediately thought I was weird, I'm sure. But I wore this phonic ear right here from first grade all the way until 6th grade, 5 whole years. So I was pregnant for 5 years, right? A rather not too uncomfortable pregnancy. It's not that heavy. But really, I wasn't pregnant, as you know. First grade, no way. But that just shows you the kind of kid I was. Kind of strange, right? But anyway, so I'm wearing the phonic ear, and even though I did not like the way it made me look, I did love the way it made my t-shirt sound. And once again, here's the microphone that the t-shirt wore, and it also has a sweet little R on there, and this cord thing that helped kind of keep us connected. It's magic. I don't completely understand how it works, but it is magic. And so every day I put this on, put my phonic ear on, and then I also brought the microphone to school. I would take it out of my book bag along with all of my school stuff, and I would walk this up to the teacher's desk and give it to my teacher every single day. And she would put it around her neck like this and wear it all day long. So what this did was it amplified my teacher's voice. It made her voice really, really loud and clear, but only for me because I was the only kid wearing the phonic ear. So just like in the book, it made her voice very clear. It sounded like she was talking directly into my ears no matter where she was in the classroom. And even when she stood behind me, I could still really understand her. I could pick up on some of those consonant sounds that I normally can't hear. And so that meant I didn't have to lip read as much. I could look down and take notes and still understand what she was saying. And very soon after I got set up with this microphone and the phonic ear, I found out that she could stand anywhere in the classroom and even be having quiet conversations with other students, and I would hear those too. And then soon after that, I found out that if she went out into the hallway, maybe to fuss at another student, I could hear that too. And then I found out that I could hear my teacher wherever she was in the entire school building. And she could not hear me, but I could hear her. So you'll see on the bottom of page 41 that I was even able to hear my teacher when she was in the place called the Teacher's Lounge. I don't know if they call that the Teacher's Lounge anymore, but it's basically the teacher's break room. But when you call it the Teacher's Lounge, you sort of end up thinking about teachers sitting in lounge chairs, drinking some kind of fizzy, fruity drink, and beach umbrellas, and just lounging, having a wonderful time. I don't think that's really what they do, but that's what they deserve, especially right now when they're trying to navigate all this crazy online school stuff. They deserve the best, most beautiful, exotic, wonderful, relaxing teacher's lounge in the whole world. So, totally. But anyway, back then in the teacher's lounge or teacher's break room, the teachers were even allowed to smoke cigarettes in the building. So I could actually hear them smoking. And if my teacher was a long-time smoker, and I had a few of those later on, I would hear this. Because smoking is not good for you. It's not. But on this panel, on this page 41, you'll see the teacher saying a word that I wasn't supposed to hear. H-E double hockey sticks. Oh, you know what that word spells. And my editor had to fight to keep that word in there. And I'm so glad we were able to keep it because I wanted to show that I was hearing things that I really should not have been hearing at all. So a word like H-E double hockey sticks, which I'm spelling out so that I don't get in trouble, especially with your parents and guardians and teachers. Because you guys aren't really supposed to hear me say that either. But that's part of the fun of that panel, is getting to hear something that I wasn't allowed to hear. And then the magical page, the most magical page in the entire book, page 42, when I indeed hear my teacher using the bathroom. Oh my goodness. Now, if I haven't hooked you by this page, and because of this page, if you aren't hooked on this book yet by this page, then I have not done my job. This page is there to keep you reading and to make you laugh. I want people to know that being deaf isn't all bad. There are some really funny things that can happen that go with it. And this is one of them for sure. So a lot of people ask, well, how could you possibly have known? And that's a really good question, because back then when my teachers went to the bathroom, or left the classroom to go to the bathroom. It wasn't like they were walking down the hallway going, "Hey, Cece, my bladder is feeling very full. I think I'll relieve myself now. Oh, look, there's a door. It says ladies on it. I'll open it and take care of business." That's not what happened. Of course, nobody talks like that. You just, when you gotta go, you go. So I had to be a sound detective. And so maybe I would hear something that went kind of like this. Creak. I think that's the door. And then I would hear all this rustling, rustle, 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 and the rustle of clothes. And, I wonder what she's doing. And then there would be a zip. And I think, that sounds a little bit like a zipper. And then I would hear the sound of, well, it sounded like my teacher was standing right next to a river. A flowing river. And I would think, I don't remember there being a river in front of G.W. Carver Elementary School. Oh, wait, there isn't a river in front of the school. That's not a river, that's pee. Ah! And then I would hear the sound that really indicated that, yes, my teacher was in the bathroom, and it is not the flush like you might be thinking. It's this sound. The sound of sweet relief. That's when I knew where my teacher was for sure. And then that was followed by, ooh, the flush. And then I knew for absolutely sure that that is where my teacher had been, in the bathroom. So, an amazing thing to be able to hear your teacher at his or her most vulnerable moment of their school day. Oh my goodness. Page 43 continues, and in that middle panel, you see a little girl asking, well, what happened? And that girl comes up later and becomes a very important part of the story later, as you know. Those of you who have read the book know that she's very important to the story. And then it goes on to say, or we go on to see, rather, that I start to think about the phonic ear a little differently. Maybe I'm embarrassed by it, but it does some pretty amazing things. Maybe it is a lot like Batman's utility belt, and I love Batman. And Batman's got that utility belt with all these contraptions, and that belt is the source of a lot of his superpowers. Well, I have the same thing. I have my own utility belt, or whatever you want to call it, that I strap on every day, and it is called the phonic ear, right? It's the phonic ear. It is my own utility belt. So I start to see myself differently. Maybe I could be a superhero too, because I can hear everything my teacher says and does. In the classroom, I will gain the wisdom of the ages. In the hallway, I will discover the secrets of my fellow man. In the entire school building, I will... Wait, is she using the bathroom again? And possibly in the entire world. And no one else can hear what I hear. Amazing. I could be a superhero too. And then on the bottom of page 44, the superhero alter ego, who doesn't have a name yet, says, "Holy hearing aid, Batman." And that line right there, that holy part, is based on what Robin, who was Batman's sidekick, that's what Robin would say in the 1960s TV show. He'd be like, "Holy cow, Batman, that's a big boulder," or whatever. So I was adapting that for the story. Holy hearing aid, Batman, I will amaze everyone. So I have this big moment where I think, wow, this is incredible. I'm a superhero. And if you'll notice, in the superhero version of my world, that I'm actually wearing the phonic ear on top of my undershirt, and I don't have it covered. I'm proud of it. It's part of my power. I'm not hiding it. But we all know that in real life, I kept it hidden. And that's a very important detail, that not only am I willing to be in public in my undershirt of all things, I'm willing to be in public showing off this giant box, this giant source of my power. And so that's why the superhero version of me, who we all know is Deafo, that's why she's dressed like that. That's her superhero costume, because she's totally willing to show the world what she's got on. So anyway, I'm all deep into this wonderful fantasy. How great am I? And boom, pop, whatever sound effect you want. That fantasy is broken when a kid comes up and says, "What are those things in your ears? Are you deaf?" That's when the fantasy actually ends. And I have to wait and think about it. Am I deaf? So then it goes on to say, superheroes might be awesome, but they are also different. And being different feels a lot like being alone. With the phonic ear, I have super hearing. Without it, I can't hear. Am I deaf? So that's very true. There are so many levels of what I hear and can't hear in different situations. With my hearing aids, it's almost like, yeah, I have pretty good hearing. If I take them out, I can't really hear very much at all. And when I used the phonic ear, I had this amazing super hearing. So am I deaf? What am I? Am I hearing? I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't fully belong to either world. And that's why I go into that bubble of loneliness. I feel like I don't belong anywhere. And I feel very lonely and isolated. And so that's how chapter 4 ends. It's both a very positive and empowering chapter, but it's also a very sad and introspective chapter as well. Phew, that was a lot of information. So next time we will do chapter 5, and chapter 5 will be all about a new friendship. So thank you so much for tuning in, and once again, please stay safe. You take care. Bye.